Think about that. So now people may be looking at in the next year that they request like, oh, hey, where was this grown? I only want South Carolina corn. I only want Florida corn. I only want Georgia, Mississippi corn, because I don't want that stuff that may have these other chemicals in there.
That'll give a whole new meaning to certificate of origin, won't it? Usually it's just by a sovereign, where one nation to another nation for imports or exports, where which nation produced this? Because I see things from China on the shelf, foodstuffs, and I'm like, I lived there, worked there, no way. And I'll move on to something else. But imagine if you're like looking at the label, and, oh, that came from Ohio.
I was watching a really cool video on a car that, anyway, I got caught up in the moment there. I don't know. It was one of those videos that got me. A guy kept looking at a Studebaker pickup, which actually was just the frame, but the guy was going into wood restoration, which had nothing to do with the car, so I was caught up in that. My bad. Anyway, here we are. The world is falling apart exponentially as we speak, and I do have a special guest with me. I'm going to let you introduce yourself and where we can find you, and then we'll go from there.
Will do, Jim. Thanks. Yeah, and anything that makes you feel good, even if it's a blast from the past, whatever it is, get into those moments that's going to get your vibration raised up. Let yourself feel good, The whole thing about what we're seeing across the worldscape here is to try to make you feel bad, try to make you feel depressed, and we should just avoid that at any cost. And whatever it is, if you're going to jam out, if you're going to restore something, if you're going to be out in nature, take photos, dance, music, whatever, cook, enjoy it.
Yeah.
Because that's what's being stolen from us is the enjoyment of life.
Absolutely. Very much.
David DuByne, Adapt 2030. And I'm also over on Bright Tea on 2 to 3 p.m. Fridays with the Mini Ice Age Conversation Show.
Yeah.
Jim, lots to talk about. Natural cycles colliding with man-made chaos. So where does it take us?
Right. Well, I'm actually here in the Bright Tea Studios doing my show now. So we're kind of twinsies that way, right? Doing the same thing here. I wanted to give you a quick audio I want to go down this road of an audio, and I was going to talk to you about this before we got started.
I'm happy to have a conversation with you. I do not want to be on camera.
Well,
please put the cameras away.
I'm sorry, we're on a public area, so we are allowed as press.
She's asked them several times for them to turn the cameras off, and they will not do it.
It's so ridiculous this is what we see going on, and why is it that a press secretary of the transportation secretary doesn't want to be on camera? And I don't understand that. But anyway, this is the world we're living in, so I thought maybe you would have a good observation to why it is we're seeing this. But what is your take on, obviously, the whole Palestine water table issue as well?
Yeah, it's a great point. You should know your right to film. Like she brought up a thing. You're in public. You have the right to film. So it's going to be citizen journalists like all of us to really try to bring the information out, because you can see the absolute failure in the political system, and the dioxins are where we're going to need to look. Now, I will split a hair here, and the railroad is actually telling the truth about their very small, very minuscule vinyl chloride measurements that they're finding. So the long chain compounds were broken down during the heat in the fire. Mm-hmm. So that chemical really does not exist anymore. It's been broken into different chemicals. Some of those dioxins is which the big elephant in the room, which they won't acknowledge. They're testing for the wrong things.
Right.
And it's going to be up to us to do it. And those around in your neighborhoods and the cities, and you better know. And I'm not just saying, but I know my right to film, because with the Adapt 2030 channel and the censorship and the topics I cover about natural cycles overriding on top of what man-made stresses and distractions there are to cover up the natural crop losses that were inbound anyway. And now a quick word from Patriot Gold Group. Have you kept up with the big headlines so far this year? Bank of America says that gold should be a mainstay investment for the next 3 years. Big banks and billionaires agree on two things. We're heading toward a recession, and investors need to buy gold. The Patriot Gold Group is introducing the 2023 Recession Protection No Fee for Life IRA. Mention Adapt 2030, you're going to get the best in-class service from Patriots protecting Patriots. Patriot Gold Group has the No Fee for Life IRA, where your 401k or IRA can be in physical gold or silver on qualifying rollovers. That's 888-546-7020 to reach out for your free investor guide today. Keep in mind, Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs top-rated IRA gold dealer 6 years in a row. That's 888-546-7020. And now on with the video. I know my right to film, and we all should, because when somebody says, you can't film here, you go, oh, yes, I can. I have the right to film. It's in public. Here's what it is. Statute this, depending on your state.
Yeah.
Because we're going to need to get in and film these areas, the cleanups, the cover-ups, dead animals, dead fish, whatever it is in the waterways. It's going to be the citizens that break the story this time.
Yeah.
Seymour Hersh times 1,000 times a million, because the government will not be clean with the information, in my personal opinion. Now, you can agree or disagree with that.
Oh, I think you're spot on. And I've talked about this consistently as one of the things that we have really have kind of ignored, is that we keep saying that we've changed the chemical makeup, and it's, look, it's clean now, but we're not testing for what we turned it into. And that in itself is really where the lies really, I think, is the problem, is we consistently lie to ourselves by testing for something that is not, we know is not going to be there. But we know that it's changed into something else that is actually more detrimental to the world around us. And, oh, look, oh, we cleaned it up. See, it tested. Yeah, you ding dong. Because when you burned it and incinerated this at however many degrees that it went up in, it's going to change into other things. It's no different than how you change ethanol or biodiesel. You heat things up, you put acids in, you change chemical bonds, you change the molecular structure of things, and it becomes something else. That's what happens here. And then, oh, look, no, we fixed it. And it's not fixed whatsoever.
It's not. And the detrimental effect to farm animals, farm land, you have to think about this for a second. Dioxins, a few gallons of dioxin, and they close entire cities. Camp Lejeune, the entire scandal of Camp Lejeune that we've heard about over, people getting sick from the water table, that was a few hundred gallons of dioxin.
Thousands of gallons.
Yeah. And we're talking about burning 500,000 gallons of substances and turning it into then airborne dioxins that are going to lay across the farm fields. This is so many orders of magnitude above that. It's just...
Well, how is this not really like a Chernobyl effect, where we're not actually creating a containment zone that says, hey, by the way, or should it be treated that way? I mean, should we be scaling back to a certain circumference to say, hey, don't enter into this area, don't eat the vegetables for the next couple of years, don't eat the fruits? I mean, how many thousands of backyard fruit trees, walnuts, pecans, acorns, and different things like that are being grown that are going to be affected for, what, a decade, a year, 10 days? I mean, how long does that actually go for?
Multiple decades. I mean, if you look at some of the cleanups that were done in the 1950s and 60s, they're still not fit for growing foods for human consumption on them, that kind of time frame.
Yeah.
And you have to realize that was from Ohio all the way through both Great Lakes up into southern Ontario, all the way over to, upstate New York, down into Maryland, parts of Virginia, and halfway through West Virginia. You could look at the HYSOP, HYSOP. I'll spell this for anybody out there. HYSOP, the HYSOP model. It's a NOAA product that just measures distribution of particles in the air, and you can watch it flow every 15 minutes or every 1 hour, however they track it.
Right.
They closed that down during the event of the fire because it was such thick, dense black mat rolling to about 15,000 feet all the way up into Ontario.
Right.
It wasn't gaseous and very light and just like little wispy smoke clouds. It was a black mat traveling. Well, that was it. Now you have to look at the distribution of all that from Ontario to upstate New York down into central Virginia. That whole area that is a circle, the food that comes out of there will be toxic. So then you have to think, if the true announcement came, how much would that affect global stock markets, futures trading for corn? The second largest egg production area is in Ohio. The dairy industry there, they can't graze on the grass. Everything will have to be put under roof moving forward. And the soil's brought in there. Even if they were to do indoor ag, they couldn't use the water or the soil in the local area. It would have to be imported from, other parts in the United States. So put that into perspective and see what kind of damage it's done, and nobody wants to talk about it.
So how far will this water plume actually go? I mean, this is the Ohio River Valley. What happens next in this? I mean, does it turn into a plume? And I mean, am I overthinking this, thinking too hard or whatever? When you think about how it goes down to the water table, there's certain leaching. You have certain strata of stone limestone, different things. I mean, where that will sit in certain beds and then emit at later times because of water table rise or flow. So rise or flow of that, and then there's all these different factors, right? So water could sit in a pool on top of some limestone for a decade, and then all of a sudden here comes a really good dry or a really good wet area or a time, and then all of a sudden it washes out. Suddenly we have another epidemic on our hands. How do we really define how far this will go and how long it will last?
That's a good one, because you're talking about multiple layers on the Earth's surface. You know, you have the ground layer, and then about 10 feet per year is the saturation of water to replenish an aquifer.
Right.
But you're right. Every time, again, I give credit to the railroads for riding and just splitting the hair and riding in the invisible gray line, because when they tested the water further afield, yes, the contaminants were gone. A, they were testing for the wrong contaminants, but B, they had been flushed down when that weather front passed through. Problem is, the next time it rains and has a massive rainstorm, you're going to get plume number 2.
Right.
And then plume number 3 and plume 4. But at the same time, down the Mississippi, they're pulling that for irrigation waters over the heartland of America's croplands 50 miles inland.
Right.
So are they going to try to pull water for irrigation between these rain plumes and wash off dioxin plumes that will be every single rainstorm for more than a decade? Like, how do you get the timing right? Okay, everybody in Missouri and Arkansas, you can irrigate for this week, but there's another plume inbound. You need to close off all your intake pipes and then wait for this one to pass, sterilize or clean your pipes or whatever it is, and then you can pull it, irrigate again. Oh, wait, there was another rainstorm in the Ohio Basin. We need to wait. And they're like, what's this on and off irrigation going to do to our crops further afield than just in the Ohio River Basin there?
Yeah. Well, and think about that. I mean, you've got, that goes clear down through, and if you think about how it really kind of interconnects, it ties into the Missouri Valley as well. That's out in the Kansas City, Missouri, Kansas, that goes down through Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, down in the Delta. We could see this 50 years from now where we see a shrimp loss or something that we're seeing people get sick in the Louisiana area because the water flow in that area becomes very stagnant. So it doesn't flow and it settles in. We could see 50 years from now, suddenly people are coming up with these huge cancer plumes of people. Like, why is this happening? And everybody's going to forget that back in Ohio, we had a train derailment.
Yeah, and I'll talk to the watershed there. You're much more familiar with that Kansas further, what you just described there. I'm more familiar with the East Coast, as obviously from different places here.
Yeah.
So, you know, they just had that huge chemical fire in Chicago that drifted down over Illinois. Like, where does that settle into in terms of water basins and runoff as well events?
Right. Well, because that where the Ohio River Basin hits in is at the bottom end of Missouri, right there where Kentucky and right there by Tennessee, Missouri, and that little tri-corner area right there. That's kind of the tip of where the Ohio River Valley goes, but then it hits the Tennessee River Basin and then goes down to the lower Mississippi. So there's all these things where we seem to think, oh, well, there's these mountains that separate it, there's all this stuff, but underneath those layers, I mean, you understand aquifers, you understand that. I mean, these things go across some vast parts of our country that we don't even think about. We think of rivers, but we don't think about what aquifers can do.
Right. And a lot of people with the Bill Gates buying the farmland only focus on the farmland. They're not focusing on the water rights and the aquifers that exist under that farmland, which is far going to exceed the value of the crops above, especially if it's non-contaminated waters in a contaminated world that we're seeing. I'm going to say purposefully set off at a time overlapping on a natural cycle that would bring in just massive crop losses that would shake society to its core. Now,
would it be actual crop losses, or are we talking about lack of nutrition? I mean, I'm going to show the map there for a lot of people to see out there, the map we're talking about. Well, but it would be would it actually kill the plants off, or would the plants survive but then be toxic themselves?
More of that, you know, unless it's a direct acid rain, which had been talked about. Again, when you burn that, vinyl chloride is a chlorine atom, so it'll bind in the, you know, we got acid rain. Now, once the initial damage is done, and I had a discussion with a friend saying, you know, they're lucky right now when it wouldn't be so noticeable, because you have to think about if you had a water stream full of frogs, insects, crickets everywhere, fireflies buzzing, all tree canopy out, the forest just ignited in the whole fields, everything just life booming during the middle of summer. If that event were to happen and it went completely silent during the middle of the summer, how much of a scare factor that would be and how much more noticeable it would be.
Yeah.
Now, the acid rain's coming down now. It's going to make this. I was getting some reports of acidified soils in the rainwater at a 3 pH, anywhere between 3 and 4 pH.
Wow.
That's not good for plants. You generally need around a 6, 6.5, 7.
Yeah.
Some plants that really love acidic soils to grow in, say, pine forest or on the edges of pine forest, those are at 5.5. But the uptake of the dioxins into the plants, that's going to be so long of a time that it's going to continue to pull out of the soil. So I think the government's going to be left with one or two options, Jim, really one or two. They're either going to have to come out right and say, farmers, don't plant there. Or they could just let them grow it and then throw it into the food chain, and then everybody will become sick at the same time. And imagine the scare of all the food source being poisoned, and the realization that whatever you could buy could be poisoned, but you're not really sure because there's no, genetic marker or coloration when you slide a black light over it, whether it's full of dioxin or not.
Right.
So which one's going to get the greatest impact and outcome of fear and societal control and have humanity switch systems? And subsequent upset in the food production system is nothing more than get you on a digital rationing card into central bank digital currencies at the exact same time, because hungry people will do anything. So as soon as I see a massive event tied to food, I know it's going to be a massive push to send humanity or some sort of control system and intersect those two of hungry populace with a new system that they'll accept easily.
Right. Well, no different than everybody. Well, you can't travel across the ocean. You can't go back to work. Oh, we'll just get this government chemical, and then you can go back to your life as regular. And now we're finding out that this stuff is actually just super poison, and it's weakening everybody's immune system. Now, think about this. If we have people canning or canned goods that'll be manufactured by Del Monte, by all these other companies, let's say it's corn. That corn could sit on the shelf for how long before it actually gets to us? So this could be corn that's not going to enter the food source. It could be a year or two. I mean, they could, by the time they harvest it next year, they go and they dry it and they process it and then put it back in the cans and they get the cans shipped back out. It could be 2024, 2025, maybe 2026 before we actually see this hitting the food shelves. But then that means, okay, so then the people start eating it. Then it's another 6 to 8 months to develop the cancers and the health problems. We could be in 2026, 2027 before any of that hits. Do you see how far away it could be just in corn? I mean, a can of corn, that's how far away it could be.
Yeah, corn is a heavy feeder, and that is one that uptakes dioxins the most out of the plant kingdom. Mushrooms would be number one, obviously, but that doesn't have any leaves. And you hit that point there. So think about it in the inverse. If you want to buy clean canned food, you're going to have to buy anything that was, February of 2023 or prior, because that toxin won't make it into that canned food processing facility until after these dates come with this next planting season here. So, again, use it to your advantage. Know the dates. Prior to Feb 2023, it's clean. Post 2023, it's suspect.
Well, that makes you then, so now it'll be a marketing thing. If you're in the Georgia area, Florida, South Carolina, those areas that are on the other side of the Appalachians, well, you might be less likely to be affected by these toxins that are being flowed towards the Southwest through the river valley. Think about that. So now people might be looking at in the next year that they request, like, oh, hey, where was this grown? I only want South Carolina corn. I only want Florida corn. I only want Georgia, Mississippi corn, because I don't want that stuff that may have these other chemicals in there.
That'll give a whole new meaning to certificate of origin, won't it? Usually it's just by a sovereign, where one nation to another nation for imports or exports, where which nation produced this? Because I see things from China on the shelf, foodstuffs, and I'm like, I live there, work there, no way. And I'll move on to something else. But imagine if you're like looking at the label and, oh, that came from Ohio. What a detriment that will be to American agriculture, where we're going to have to shun states that are major producers of ag.
Right. Well, and so what about this? What if the cotton, would cotton be an uptake of this chemical? Then they process cotton and then put it into clothing? Would it be something that would then leach into your body that way or come out in the wash?
I have the idea, but I don't know the answer.
Right.
That's a really interesting point that you bring up, that bioaccumulation. I am wondering if cotton would uptake and, it would come out of the skin, because obviously, you wash your clothes, sometimes the detergents, you'll have some...
It'll be a
there's
slow
always going to be
leach out of
some
that.
residue left over after a wash.
And then the wash goes into the chemical treatment plant at the city, which then doesn't process that out, and then goes back in there and we recycle it back through the city water. But here's another part of that is, when you have that, you got to think about, not only the cotton, but then it's the recycling of that water how many times does water get reused? But then how many people have plastic pipes in their house? Now, I'm a big fan of copper. Usually have my copper vessel here. I drink water out of my copper all the time. But copper is not going to leach in those chemicals, but those houses with plastic pipes that everybody loves, PEX. Oh, I love PEX because I got all this fancy tubing in my house. But that plastic will absorb these chemicals in there and leach into it while they sit there at night waiting for you to turn the shower on again, and then they take off again. But now they've leached in that plastic, but they're going to leach back out through heating and cooling processes. So this could be leaching in and out of your house for a decade just because you have plastic pipe. I mean, I just think there's so many factors to this we really haven't put into consideration that just, oh, wait, we had a train derailment. But what happens in their daily lives? Or even, let's say, to houses that, the ventilation system was sucking this through. It's gone through the fan, it's gone through the ductwork, and all the dust and everything collected these different chemicals in there. What effect can that have us on long term?
Yeah, because, you mentioned that they recycle the water and then it's pumped back into the city system. Well, a lot of that's released downstream as well. You have to realize that there's massive releases of water that after they finish treating it. So it seems like there'd be this perpetual drip feed. Imagine all the cities along the Ohio River and along the Mississippi that are re-entering water back into the to the estuary and flow system there on a regular basis. And it would just be continuously drip feeding in.
All right. Well, we're going to have a Flint, Michigan effect, right? Where, we're getting to it. We're working on it. But yet I know, and here's what's something curious. And this is one of the things I commented on my show. I think it was like Monday. Just recently, Ohio changed all of their building codes that they can only accept copper in new home construction or any new construction. So why is it that this went into effect just this last few months here, and then they suddenly have a chloride spill? Now they want to put copper in all the houses. They don't want any more PEX. So was that because they knew PEX was bad, or was this a planned event? And now they're going to try to keep people away from so the old houses or old construction has the PEX. If you want to keep yourself healthy, go to copper. Do you see where the nefarious portion of this could be?
I do. And then, there's a copper shortage going on in Chile and Peru right now. I think they're down about 37% on their production. And just the overall amount of rare earth minerals that were required for all of the, movement to windmills and whatnot, that whole, green agenda, wealth transfer.
Yeah.
I mean, copper was a main constituent. They didn't even have enough copper to, move over to green, whatever economy that was planned as such. So imagine if you're going to try to now pull an entire industry, American homes of only copper pipes. There's going to be only a certain amount, a finite amount of that mineral that comes out, that metal refined. Mm-hmm. Are the copper warehouses going to run dry? I mean, can we even mine enough every single year? I'm not a fan of the new Green New Deal. I absolutely believe that we could use, Parendev magnetic motors and gravitational vortex power, microhydro. Maybe an industry will evolve where they'll cut down all the copper cabling around the planet and turn it back into, the base metal and then fit pipes out of it. But as I see it, I just don't know how.
Right.
If what you're saying, and I absolutely believe you, that if they're going to move to, and once people realize with the PEX what's happening, they're going to demand copper-only piping, and the demand for that alone in the U.S. home industry to retrofit all homes and, fit into new homes. And then in addition, the massive, unbelievable, gargantuan 50,000-pound elephant in the room that wants all that copper to gobble up for the green agenda, there just won't be enough for both. So Who would win out, do you think?
Well, and that's a sad part of it is that the government keeps putting their finger on the scale of picking winners and losers. And so obviously they're pushing this green agenda, which we know is a complete failed industry. They cannot sustain themselves. The ethanol industry cannot sustain itself without RINs. We know that the windmill industry is completely 100% subsidized, as well as the solar panel industry. When I was doing the Department of Defense contracting under Obama, I did it for 18 years, so I straddled several presidents. Obama was pushing to get all the military bases off grid, right? They want to do solar panel projects for every single building. Well, I put together a solar panel project for a building that was less than 2,000 square feet, and it cost $100,000. And it's like there's no way that this will ever pay this back for the function of this building because it was basically like a maintenance shop. And there was no need to put this huge solar panel array on there, but then I had to take space out of the building to put that in there. And the thing is, it was all 100% subsidized, and then we had to pay a subcontractor full rate to come in and put all that in, even though we had already paid for it as a federal government to put into a federal government project. I mean, we just talk about stupidity and motion. We just don't even realize how much we've screwed ourselves, and yet none of those solar panels are sustainable. They don't last long enough to pay themselves back. And so the whole copper thing, that China was, I don't know if people realize this, about 8 years ago, China was sending over what they call, it was contaminated copper. It wasn't actually a pure copper, so you couldn't solder it. You couldn't do the natural torching adhesion process to put the copper pipes together because they had impurities in the copper and it wouldn't bind. People don't realize that even some of the copper we have is actually tainted.
You know, solar panels are good for emergencies for yourself or family. You're not going to rely on them for 20 years power, but it sure would nice to have, you know, a couple kilowatt backup to be able to charge phones, communication equipment, flashlights, et cetera, you know, taking it on the preparation side of things versus, you know, this whole re-electrify the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and then the toxicity of the lithium itself, which is a salt brine process, but yet we don't realize that stuff catches on fire and you're dead instantly. I mean, this is, again, we're on the same topic, but it's all this toxicity that we're running right up next to, and supposedly the government's here to save us. I mean, that's what the government chemical in your arm was supposed to do, was for your safety. We're doing all this stuff, safety, 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 but then the first thing we find out is, well, it really doesn't matter for them, it matters to you, and only when it comes to your life, you have to worry about safety, not what they're doing.
Right. So take all this as a subset A of information that we're talking about. The realization of the contamination in Ohio, Pennsylvania, other parts. Southern Ontario is a huge corn growing area of Canada. So suddenly take that offline. Like, that is going to shatter and rattle the futures markets in itself.
Right.
Okay. So that's subset A of what's going on. I think that's the distraction, in addition to a full play to destroy food production. But that is going to be run with in the media, in my opinion, as the distraction away from the catastrophic runaway ozone hole and ozone depletion event because of the Hunga Tonga eruption back in 2022 of January.
Right.
See, you look at these natural cycles and truly what's happening on the natural side of things that are going to destroy crops equally as much, if not more, than what we just saw on a multi-state area from a single chemical. Mm-hmm. The water vapor eruption from the Tonga eruption back in 2022 January added 10% more moisture into our atmosphere in a single day.
Wow.
Now, a lot of that atmosphere was not just blown up and then it turned into extra clouds. It was blown so high it went 30 to 50 miles above our heads.
Man.
Now, that reached an area called the mesosphere.
Right.
And when that water vapor went up there, it crystallized and instantly turned into ice. Obviously, your ocean water, and suddenly you're at, you know, minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit in a matter of minutes. Those ice crystals are flat surfaces where ozone, O3, can be broken down by chlorine and bromine. Mm. Now, what this means is you have to have more ice crystal surfaces to break down ozone.
Right.
Now, since there's the most ice crystals ever injected into the mesosphere, as far as we know, in the last, say, 600 to 800 years, then you would see catastrophic runaway depletions over the southern ozone area, over Antarctica. But the periphery crop zones in South America, Southern Australia, Southern Africa, South Africa to be exact, are going to be heavily damaged and affected by UVB radiation. Like, this ozone hole is going to expand so quickly and so wide and so vast.
Right.
Hey, it's going to shock the scientists how this could even be possible.
I thought we fixed that by not
when
having
that UVB just gets ripped open in the column through the atmosphere, the amount of ground penetrating radiation that we're going to get is going to be something to behold. People will not be able to work outside. They're going to have to start to schedule differently, even for people to get out into the crops. And that's where your DNA damage would come in.
Right.
So realize that subset B. Yeah. That August, September, October, and November, this is poised for this year. So imagine if you get this catastrophic ozone depletion, runaway UVB crop damage event, laid on top of the war intensifying in Ukraine, even a larger breadbasket going offline, very little fertilizer production out of Europe because of the self-imposed sanctions. And then we come into a multi-state area that they deem unfit for agriculture. sandwich that together and which one's the distraction and which one's the real event, Jim.
Right. Well, let me go with one more distraction. I thought we got rid of the ozone problem when we got rid of big bar hair and
oh no,
fluorocarbons.
Bring back the hair.
I thought we fixed that whole ozone problem. I mean, when you're telling me there's a volcano that's done this, we've done without big bar hair for several decades here. I thought that fixed that. I'm highly disappointed that scientists didn't get that right again. But that was a CFM or chlorophorol carbons, or CFCs or whatever. I thought that's what we got rid of because, Final Net or Aquanet was the problem. Anyway, I'm trying to throw a little humor in this. Okay, so when you talk about this schedule of this happening, because of those ice crystals building up in there and creating that's why we're going to have the flashpoint in August, which will cause the tear in the ozone. Is that correct? Because it has to build up the resistance. Is that right?
Well, it's not a tear in the ozone. It's an actual, just as what just happened there. You lit fire to a chemical and it changed chemical composition.
Right.
Ozone is O3, but when it lays on one of those ice crystals and touches and combines with chlorine, it rips apart one of the oxygen atoms off of there, and you're left with O2 and then a chlorine product and then a bromine product that then sink back into the atmosphere. You're actually destroying the ozone and changing it chemically. And what happens is usually this would occur in extreme cold conditions, but you need the surfaces. So the coldest of the time in Antarctica, the ozone hole occurs every year. It's August, September, October, November, and then it seals itself back over because the temperatures aren't cool enough in that upper atmospheric layer to allow that runaway ozone to occur again. So it's all based on temperature and the amount of ice crystal surfaces.
Right.
But since this time we are into cloud blocking, VEI 8 index on the volcanic eruption, largest one in the last 200 years.
Right.
We're getting a much cooler temperature profile in the upper atmosphere of anywhere from 12 to 18 degrees Fahrenheit, cooler than the 30-year average. In addition to the ice crystals breaking down all that ozone into O2, and then it would be chlorine gases and bromine.
Well, and so when you...
It's a regular cyclical thing that happens every single winter in the southern hemisphere.
But because of the volcano, it's not going to be able to repair itself. Right?
Right. It's going to run away until the ice crystal clouds come out of the mesosphere. Once that happens, that whole entire process will cease. But the only time that you ever really get any type of water vapor up there is when there's rocket launches, when there's bolides or meteorites coming in through that layer of the atmosphere 30 to 50 miles above our heads.
Right.
And you can start to see these wafting noctilucent clouds, these polar stratospheric clouds really high up, 50 miles up. They have a teal blue, but now they're starting to turn electric orange and electric yellow. And the only time we've seen that is in paintings of, say, 1817, 1818, and also after the eruption of Krakatoa in the 1880s. So if you go back in the last 200 years of looking at paintings, you're only ever going to see massive amounts of these stratospheric clouds in 2 different time periods, and now we are approaching the 3rd. So then you have to look and see, all right, well, what happened during those times of conquest and war to procure more resources when people were hungry and complaining to the government? But now it seems our government's actually throwing in and adding another event to cause food shortages to amplify and then ride on top of that natural cycle, which is scary on how dark that is to think about. People actually planned that.
And because you know this, you know that they know this, right? I mean, you're not the one that's actually just stumbled across this information. Like, you know that this is what's going on. And if you know this, then obviously the government scientists should know it as well, right?
Well, absolutely. They're the ones who actually have the first data coming in on the uncorrupted data off the satellites themselves that go into the Excel sheets and the different types of SLV sheets that you need computer softwares to decode and turn into a visual format. They're seeing that, months before anything visual representation comes out where we can present it out to the public. Unless you can read, 2 million lines of code of spreadsheet and then, put it into some visible form. I mean, it takes computers to work all that and get the first initial data sets off on how they download. They don't take pictures and send it back. It's numerals that are decoded then eventually into visual formats.
I'm sending you a picture right now. This is a photograph of a Kansas sunset just 2 days ago. And I wanted you to look at that and tell me, is that the types of colors that you're referring to? And I can see if I can get this pulled up for the audience, but I wanted to verify that with you first before I pulled it up. Is that what that is? You said these certain colors that you saw or you would say that would be there. Is that what that is?
Oh, yeah. Can you put that right up to the phone? Yeah. Now, what's the altitude on those? You see how they're so bright? Now, if you were closer to the epicenter of the volcanic eruption, then you would call that volcanic afterglow. But because we're so far south and across the equator, those would definitely be fitting into that upper atmospheric cloud band. Yeah. So that's provable that it has circulated across the equator and encompasses the entire planet now in that same band of the atmosphere. So a few months, 6 months back, they were starting to get some measurements on optic aerosol density and how much, sunlight was being filtered through on a measurable, depending on
So
what wavelength they're looking at. Visible, measurable, all the way up to about 60 degrees north latitude. But, it's been several months. So for sure, this has gone completely around the planet from the North Pole to the South Pole. Now we wait for the after effects, which generally is a huge disruption in agriculture because the atmospheric flows change, the jet streams change their normal flow, and the cloud cells crash into each other and send out these once in 1,000 or once in a 2,000 year floods on a regular basis.
So we're talking about...
That was inbound already on top of what just happened.
We're talking about scorched earth effect, right? We're talking about basically the big magnifying glass just going... You mean just scorching the earth, right? And that the idea, if this stuff is actually up there doing that creation of that hole, isn't that where we are? And that's that. I mean, I have seen the chickens in the backyard running from shade to shade. Like they don't want to sit out in the sun. They stay in the shade. And I know chickens tend to do that for predators. But in the idea that they don't even want to hang out in the open grass areas, they're always running into the shade. Is that part of that as well? We're already getting that magnification now, or is this something that's going to happen in the fall?
It's going to happen in our fall. But just in general, the UV is changing. The UV output from the sun is changing. And our sun's going through a cycle, about a 400-year cycle in terms of its output too, magnetically changing. But the amount of UV, that's why I was so familiar with UVB, because that's a lot of the changes they're talking about. The UV output actually is much more intense, where you might get some of those warning days now of UV 12 or 14, or even some extremes on 16. They'll tell you to bundle up, put the SPF 50 and everything on a 8 or 10 index, but now bring it up to an index 16. And this is what we're seeing. Animals are responding. Animals are so much more intelligent and intuitive about, earth changes, electromagnetic changes, photosensitivity changes than we are. We're about the dumbest apes on the planet, so far back behind anything that can sense these changes that are light years ahead of human perception on this.
Well, we are the only thing on Earth that has to build an environment for itself. Every other animal has adapted to the environment and lives very well on it. We have to build structure. We have to be coddled. We have to, horses, 3 seconds after birth, they're up on their feet, walk. I say 3 seconds, but, they're up doing their thing. This happens with most everything. And unless you're talking about something that gets nurtured, but humans, we're frail. We have to have clothes and heat and all this other. We don't do good in cold weather, and we can survive hot, but we still need our food, right?
Yeah, and I would ask you then to identify other changes you've seen in the animal life around you, or anybody listening. What changes have you really noticed, but you go, oh, that's odd, but you just really didn't put the cause to that.
We got about 15 minutes here left. Give me okay, so I'm Jim Price. I don't know much, blah, blah, blah. I'm average guy, just doing my thing, paycheck to paycheck. What do I need to prepare for between now and what you're saying is August? What do I need to be thinking about, either food stores, water prep? What does my life need to look like between now and then?
Well, I think your greatest skill to bump up would be how humans behave once stimulus is pushed upon them. Mm-hmm. So if the news runs with there's going to be food shortages, that people are going to run to buy all the gardening tools.
Right.
Can you front run some of the madness? Right. You know what the news will deliver in terms of fear, right, and then how people will respond. And, look at the toilet paper for all things that we saw during the COVID time. And I was in the store. I was the only guy with a bunch of food in my cart. Everybody else is looking at me, carts
right,
full of toilet paper, going, who's a stupid guy buying all the food? Look, we got all the toilet paper.
Right.
It's just things like this. So as we move through, they're going to start to run with this as another, the global warming thing has ceased and the CO2 is not as scary. So watch the bait and switch substitution of the rampant ozone hole cascading unbelievable losses. And another thing, the UVB melts sea ice faster than what we consider sunlight, heat. A combination of those two is a powerful ice melter. It's like putting ice cube in a microwave. Right. So in the past, say 45 years, they've noticed when the ozone hole was increased to its maximum, there would be drop off a cliff, ice loss across the southern oceans. So you can expect that again. There's record loss of sea ice this year, literally dropping off a cliff, but they haven't measured the ozone to the point yet. So I'm saying nature is also front running this by almost a year, giving us humans, hey, look at the catastrophic losses. They're a combination of widening ozone hole of maybe 30 million square kilometers or a little larger. And whenever we hit that point, the sea ice drops off a cliff. Well, this time it's off a cliff and then off another cliff and then bounced off a cliff and then it went down a cliff again. Right. And once you know the narrative, and I'm trying to answer the question in a long way, once you see how they're going to push the fear of the crop losses and a massive thing that you talked about it, people are going to get fried. Oh, the UV, it's going to be so big. You can't go outside. Your eyes are going to burn out of your skull. Okay, well, then what would you want to buy to protect yourself, your family, your plants? So now you're going to need some row cover. Okay, so anything involved in the production of food, you're going to need to get. Mm-hmm. But notice in order how it's going to go: completely sold out, completely sold out, completely sold out. Right. So, hey, what's your skill level of farming and growing your own food? Who do you know around in your community that's growing that you could buy larger amounts? 4 families buying together and splitting the cost can get a huge buying a 100-foot roll of something versus a 1,000-foot roll. You're going to get 500 feet for free if you get a 1,000-foot roll and you get extra people to buy it. Right. So the fear factor and the way humanity is going to move from point A to point B, once they realize their food source is in jeopardy, that'll be the first thing pushed. So learn how to grow the food, and how are you going to procure everything you can grow food, and just look for the bait and switch of that. And like I said, having some solar panels for some backup. You're going to need radio communications as well, even if it's just short term, like, I have a 25 or 23 acre farm out here, and then our neighbors have 25 acres. So sometimes we're running around 50 acres, even just those little yellow GFS units that they use out on job sites, anything that you think that you can do security with and also grow food, because the narrative is about causing the most panic to get you hungry, to get you to a digital rationing card. That is the end goal. Central bank digital currency issuance, your digital ID, and your access to food all in one lump sum, all unveiled and rolled out in the exact same time during a famine. Now, how convenient is that? Oh, and should I mention the nanotechnology that they might want to use to cleanse the earth? Oh, the earth's so polluted, but we got these nanobots that can go and cleanse the earth. We can get food again. There's a million ways they could run with this famine thing. Right. It's going to be fear, though. Fear. I look solution. Stay ahead, front run it, get in, use it to your advantage, help others. And, that's the way I look at life, though. No, absolutely. And that's all wise stuff to talk about, because, again, it's all based on fear. I mean, that's really where it goes. And, yes, there is the rational part of how do you get through these daily things, these daily tasks, but they're going to drive fear, and the irrational of us are going to overreact. Well, that's it. But they count on that. See, that's where, if we can see what the play is, to actually step out of the way of the bowling ball rolling down toward you and just, okay, well, I did something completely different. If everybody can start to think that way, and you get billions of people going outside the regular programming, if you will, for a better term, then, all bets are off. But so far, the stimulus has been mapped out to the action on the end of it, because so far we haven't been with our backs to the wall as such. Because I can't remember in America when I had to defend my home because of people trying to break in for food. I don't remember that, and nor my grandparents, well, except for a little bit in the Great Depression. But otherwise, it's just not even anything that's on our radar. There's going to be so many things that pop onto the radar screen that were so bizarre. You're just going to look back at this time and say, were we living in like a cartoon land movie? Or there's going to be things that pop up that you'd really never thought in your life that were possible. And that right there is a big part of this. I mean, I have told people about silver, gold, and brass to cover your ass.
And I don't know how else to make it more simple than that, because, I mean, yeah, you want to have your chickens and your eggs and your goat for your milk and whatever and have some meat, but you also need to have, you were doing a seed exchange last week, and that was for basically what you're talking about, is having the seeds for the future to be able to plant for yourself and take care of yourself, where others haven't planned for that at all.
Yeah, seed exchange got moved to this Sunday, by the way. A quick FYI on that.
Oh, yeah.
Also, I have a farm out here, so I'm a registered farm, and, I have my tax exemption license, everything. So I can grow tobacco, and I don't smoke, but I can turn that tobacco into pesticides and different tradables. So I look at it, any plant that I can grow, can I turn it and transmute it into something else that has another use or a tradable value further down? Because you just roll the clock back, go back to the 1860s, like what was valuable out with the settlers, what was valuable, in towns that were a little further out, not in New York City, but, once you went west of Illinois and you started to get out where you used to live out there in Kansas, what were the tradables that people really needed? So there's a few skill sets that have marched through history. And like you say, silver, gold, and brass, cover it. But there's also another little bit of list there too.
Yeah, that's I mean, hey, if you don't have the oregano for the antibiotics, you don't have certain things. Well, if you got silver, gold, and brass, well, that covers your ass, right? Maybe you're not the best farmer, but you had some silver or gold. You have a barter, right? So the tobacco you're talking about, that tobacco is not for you, but it's commerce. Right? It's through barter system that becomes very valuable. And people don't think about growing their own tobacco or having those kind of plants around. And we are all like, oh, no, I'll just go down to the Kroger. I'll go down to the whatever, the Piggly Wiggly. I'll go do this. It'll always be there. But most grocery stores don't even have 3 days worth of food ever. And yet we think it'll just infinitely be there. So, and the government's not going to be here to protect you. They're not going to be here to help you in those times. In fact, they're going to be the ones you want to avoid.
If at all possible. Yeah. It's a huge exclamation point. Yeah. Now think beyond prepping. What you have saved for the initial stage of getting where we are, getting through some chaos and being able to reassess, you're going to have to replenish those stocks. So that's another thing, key takeaway is, you might have a year's worth of food, but that only gets you a year, and you wouldn't want to survive off 100% canned food anyway. You're going to get sick. You need to supplement that with real stuff. Right. So think about your stored foods, and that will run out eventually during this, because we're going to have to go for 5 to 7 years through this transition point, that you're going to have to start replenishing your stocks. So think beyond the storage of, I already got some prepped food. That's just the minimal. You're going to need to think, I need my seeds, and I need my community, and I need to trade with others, and I need to get things that I can't produce, and I can trade what I produced with others, because the replenishment is going to be the name of the game.
Yeah. Well, but think about the guys that are in the Ohio River Valley that have to worry about their water. I mean, how do we purify that water if we really don't have a good electric source? Is this going to be a slow drip reverse osmosis, charcoal, chlorine dioxide won't take those out of there. Chlorine dioxide is an amazing product for food, for water, not only for your body, but also purifying water. But how do you get the chemical out of there? What's the process for those that can't get away from that plume?
Gravity in 3 55-gallon drums. One of those drums is full of activated charcoal, which you can produce yourself by getting your own lumber and burning it down and smothering it before it turns to ash. Crush it up and put it in a 55-gallon barrel. One barrel's full of sand, the other one's full of loose rock to grab everything, and you let gravity do the job for you. Because I've been doing more research, and Mike Adams, who we both know, has been putting out a huge amount of information on dioxin cleansing in the water. So it seems that dioxins really bind well to carbon in carbon filters. Right. So if you got 3 55-gallon drums, obviously the first are to reduce sediment out of there and pull some pathogens onto the rock. But once you get to that activated charcoal, a huge amount of that, I'm not going to say by any way, means, shape at all, but a huge amount of contaminants can be pulled into that carbon that you can produce yourself indefinitely. As long as you have wood out on your place where you're at, you can continually refill that. So every couple months you would pour it out and refill it again. 55 gallons. So you're going to need a little system to get charcoal to be able to put that. So again, it's just, your own ingenuity and then spending time with others so you can make access, because maybe 2 neighbors, 4 neighbors, 5 neighbors who want to do it. And then it becomes half a day on the weekend. Everybody cuts and chops and brings lumber, and then every, 5 people with water and, tarps and, these sort of things can make a huge amount of charcoal compared to one person. So again, it comes back to barn building. Yeah. I really believe we're stepping back into the 1860s in a pioneering lifestyle. So we need to start thinking about that. Yeah. Like, how did communities work together to accomplish so much at that time?
Well, okay, so we don't want to use plastic barrels because the plastic barrels will then leach in those chemicals and then release them back out over time, correct? Or do we use metal barrels? How do we do that when we're thinking about that for long-term storage?
Yeah, it's different. Well, the water would touch the sides of the plastic barrels, but it's meant to run through that and then collect into another vessel. Right. So the collection, you would probably want metal or glass, and even a huge amount of 5-gallon glass bottles or carboys or however you want to store your water after that. But you're right.
Well, I don't have my copper cup here. I usually drink all my water out of my copper cup every day.
You learned that in India?
Yeah, no, that's Dr. Judy Mikovits. We talked about copper and the essential need for hair color, but also you can't absorb your zinc if you don't have copper. So that's a big part of our daily lives. And also the purification process that copper gives you. That's one of the things that they get. We went to stainless steel doorknobs, and where brass doorknobs, the copper actually was able to purify that. And even though it tarnished, it was actually an antibacterial. But we don't talk about that anymore. No, it's amazing stuff. Well, David, it's been fantastic having you on here. This is the kind of conversations that we really need to have. So please be mindful of what you're getting ready to come up against. Greenhouses, seeds, nutrients that you need to have, water storage, water purification. That is very simple. Like you said, it's a 3-barrel system. You have your gravel, you have your activated culture or charcoal. These are all essential parts of daily living. And yeah, we need to go back to the 1800s. That's where you need to go and find yourself the printed books of all these different ways to make tinctures, antibiotics, different types of things you need for your gut health and other things like that, alcohol and things that you need to be able to produce those things. Because if they're not going to be on the shelf, this is the time to come together and bind together and not run from each other. We get to know your neighbors and know who they are immediately. It's an essential part of what we got going on. There will be parts of our country that will be able to flourish. There'll be other parts that will not be able to flourish. We already know that the Midwest is already having a big drought since last year, the beginning of last year, actually before that. And so we're in that drought stage, plus on top of that having the ozone issues. Going into this fall may not be a lot of fun, but you do have time. We've told you the bridge is out, and be mindful of that. So guys, if you have any questions or comments, JimPrice@thejimpriceshow.com is my email. TheJimPriceShow.com is the website. Thank you guys so much for being here.